This is the Convene podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk, where we discuss interesting stories that appear in our popular newsletter News Junkie or other important news. My name is Magdalena Tanasova, Digital Media Editor at Convene. Kurt, this time you selected the story for today, so can you give us the background?
Sure. This is Kurt Wagner. I'm the digital editor at Convene, and I wanted to talk about a story written by our very own Barbara Palmer, deputy editor. She wrote about the Freeman Trends Report 2024 Attendee Intent and Behavior, which was released Tuesday, January 16th. Convening leaders, I attended the session where they presented sort of the first look at this report, and it was very interesting. There's a lot of fascinating stuff in there. The results sort of go against what maybe has been the norm recently. And it shows that attendees kind of want different things than maybe what organizers have thought. So I found that very interesting. Ken Holsinger, Freeman's Senior Vice President for Strategy and Research, was the person that Barbara talked to. And he also did part of the presentation with Howard Gibner from PCMA. But some of the stats show that there's a wide range of different things, like a disconnect between what event organizers have said, have been offering, and what attendees say they want. And part of this that I thought was interesting was they showed a slide about the most important experience elements at an event. And one thing that sort of is at every single event now is wellness, a wellness component and wellness opportunities. And that came in with only 3% of the participants in the survey saying that that was something that was important to them. And the survey was of 2,100 individuals that was conducted in November last year in 2023. But the wellness thing is interesting. The top thing in the experience elements was immersive experiences with 64% of the vote. And then customized agenda plans was 45%, and technology was 44%, technology opportunities, I guess. And what I thought was interesting, Howard, during the session, talked about how, he's a big wellness guy and he loves wellness and the wellness stuff that's presented. But he talked about how organizers need to see the difference between what will make someone register to attend an event and what will enhance their stay at the event, basically. And usually those things that will enhance the stay are not things that will actually get them to register and pay the money to attend, like a wellness thing. It's good to have and it enhances their time there, but it's not what's going to make them sign up. And the same with the puppy booth, although, I might sign up for the puppy booth and only for that reason. But the hard thing he and Ken talked about was designing truly immersive experiences and figuring out exactly what it is that your audience wants. And another thing that this survey busted was that what they want is not dependent on necessarily the industry. It's more on age and other demographics of your attendees. And that's why I think customized agenda is probably a big deal, because everybody wants to sort of get their own thing out of an event. And so those were some numbers that I thought were surprising. And I know some of you guys did too. So let's hear from one of you.
Thanks for summarizing that, Kurt.
Well, I only did the one section. There's a whole lot more.
There is a whole lot more. And one of the things you said, hard things, and that was, that's really the takeaway that I came with. It's like you can go to a session where the planning is really identifying 4 experts or 3 experts and a moderator, and then maybe they talk about what they're going to say, and there's questions at the end. And that is not what attendees want. And, then there's those sessions where it's designed that I went to one session, this was with Sarah Michelle from Velvet Chainsaw, and we went in and there were tables set up. There was a question on the screen to talk about when you sat down. So it wasn't upon you to kind of get the ball rolling with people. It was very well designed. And that takes time. I think the networking thing was really fascinating to me, that people wanted to be connected with people who could help them solve problems.
This is Casey Gale, managing editor. I just wanted to bounce off Barbara's point that the purposeful networking was a really interesting part of this survey. More than half of attendees want to bond with peers over shared professional challenges and topics. 52% chose meetups with professionals with similar challenges, followed by topic-specific meetup opportunities. And I just found that interesting because that's a trend I've identified in stories we've been writing recently. It's not really a new concept, but I've noticed we've covered a lot of events recently where gathering people from the same discipline has really taken the forefront in networking. And I think that's partially a result of coming back from the pandemic. I think people are more interested in having purposeful connections rather than just networking for the sake of it. They want to have productive conversations and they want to make sure that they're using their time at this event in the best way.
This is Jen Dienst, senior editor. So I wanted to add, I actually saw a little bit of overlap about this in another session I went to, which was, I'm blanking on the full name of the session, but it was a session for the next generation of event professionals. I think everyone in the session was under the age of 30. There were probably about 70 attendees. It was an interesting session because everyone was asked to share what they wish for, what they worry about, and what they wonder about in terms of the industry, in terms of their own career. I started writing down every single one that was given, which was a lot, but I'm glad I did because I noticed some trends. And one of the biggest trends was really a need for more purposeful meetups and networking opportunities so that they can learn from each other as well as their older peers in the industry. And a lot of them had some really interesting ideas for that. A lot of them express more opportunities for personal development. So I just thought there was an interesting overlap there. And maybe, that could be a story idea or something that we can explore more, is creating these types of purposeful networking opportunities for younger people and older people in the industry to connect in a more meaningful way.
This is Michelle Russell, editor-in-chief. That really resonated with me because I recently interviewed the president of the International Listening Association about their conference that was held in Germany in the summer. And one of the things they did, because they heard from their members that they wanted to make connections, that was important for them. So they had 3 separate opportunities online before the event to get people to connect with each other and have a kind of buddy system, even if they were participating online, because it was a hybrid event. And she said that's the most important thing about listening, is that it happens between 2 people usually. So you need to have 2 people who are together at the event. And she said, and this is a very intimate event. I think they have maybe 100 people who gather for their conference. But she said, if you have a much larger conference, to get those connections, you can establish cohorts of maybe 30 people where they can self-organize or give them an opportunity to find a topic that they want to organize around, that they share, or to solve a problem, to Barbara's point, if that's really what they're there for, is to solve a problem, to find other individuals in a group who are also dealing with the same kind of challenge. So it's interesting to see a real life example of an organization that is reflecting what came out of the survey. I also was very surprised, like Kurt, that wellness ranked so low in the results, but it is interesting that Howard made the distinction between what people are looking for and is going to get them to register and what actually makes their experience on site sort of a nicer experience. But I do think that wellness can also be in the form of just having larger breaks between sessions, more white space. And that was one of the things that International Listening Association also did, is they had more than an hour break between sessions. And that gave people an opportunity to just network informally, organically, But in the future, she's also going to have opportunities for them to have like a workshop in that space that specifically addresses questions that came up during a panel discussion or a presentation. So they also have opportunities to more formally organize in those spaces. So those were sort of my takeaways, just because that's fresh on my mind after interviewing her recently.
Talking about wellness, one of the things that Ken Holsinger spoke about was how that becomes so primary in people's minds that everybody writes about it as an event trend. And then when people are like, it made me rethink that phrase, low hanging fruit. Like everyone's always saying, well, what's the low hanging fruit? And then they see, well, this is something that, we could fairly easily do. And so for me, one of the big takeaways is how important it is to measure what you do and really understand what drives attendees to come. And then to then be willing to kind of do the harder things that take more time and are a little bit more complex. Because I think post-pandemic, people have just really had their fill of sitting passively and having information and opinion directed at them. Like they're really hungry for interactive. And the other big thing was the trust, which has come up in Freeman surveys before, and how for these people that are people that go to meetings, in-person meetings ranked way higher than anything else in terms of what they trusted. And it makes sense because, they're talking to people and they're able to, there's these in-person gauges of the quality of information you're getting from people. So I thought that was really interesting.
You mentioned low-hanging fruit, and I thought what Ken said to you was interesting about this is going back to the networking events, because it seems like he's inferring that a lot of times we treat networking events as low-hanging fruit because he said that they consist of alcohol, dim lights, loud music, and nowhere to sit, which I found funny. And that you're just standing in a room yelling at each other face to face and awkwardly trying to read someone's badge in the dark. But the other part that I thought was interesting from the session about this was that one of the higher networking elements that they mentioned or that people voted for was the common interest meetups, which the way they explained it could be anything from who likes to crochet to, who likes to pet dogs in the dog park or whatever. And then you start with that. I mean, I find that kind of weird when you're with strangers doing that kind of thing, but maybe not. My only experience doing that would have been online, I think, in a meeting situation. But then you end up getting into the professional side of it once you get to know someone and you're not having to yell because you're not at a bar drinking. I've always said somebody the best after you get drunk with them, but that's a hard way to do it because you get drunk and you lose your voice. So doing it in a planned meetup would be a much better way to do that, I think.
And I think that's a nice segue for me to say also about the wellness trend, that it seems that events are now so packed with what's considered wellness, which is early morning runs or training sessions. I go to the gym very often, part of my daily routine, and I'm obsessed with moving my body, but I cannot take it at an event. So what's considered wellness at your home is not necessarily considered wellness at an event, especially after you watch Boys to Men until God knows what time, and then you go to a bar, and then the next day you're expected to run in the morning. I believe we're just further exhausting people, so I'm not surprised people did not put wellness further up than 3%. And one other thing that I noticed was how low mentor-mentee sessions rated. Only 13% said that they were worth this format. And I just want to make a point of that, especially after recording a new season of the Convene podcast with 20 in their 20s, where we spoke with different people about this kind of relationship, especially as they're younger, Some of them are Gen Z and some are millennials, but we explore this relationship with their older or more experienced bosses. So I believe this relationship is taken a bit wrong, and a session is not the right format for it. So it's a two-way relationship. The fact that a younger person has a mentor does not mean that there's no reverse mentorship, so that they are not also mentoring back the other person. And this cannot be really put into a session format. So just a note there that, yes, it's just not the right format for that, but it's very, very valuable for the younger people. And I believe Jen also mentioned that during our on-site recordings of the Convene talk, with the Next Gen session, that they were looking for mentors, if I remember correctly. And they're looking for this guidance in the industry moving forward, but just not in a session format.
Yeah, I heard that quite a bit in that session, but it really did feel like that was one of the overwhelming themes of that session. One of them said they wonder if they can expand knowledge to college students. So a lot of the young people in this session were early in their career. There might have been some students in there. I'm not sure. I need to check, but I think, they probably just graduated. Someone commented that they wish mentoring programs were in place for all generations, which I thought was a really interesting idea. I mean, I'm 40. I would love to have a mentor, even though I've been a writer for 20 plus years. I don't know if y'all feel like that who've been around. I think it would be really interesting to have a mentor. Here's another one. Wonder if we could connect senior and younger event profs for mentorship. Yeah, so this was definitely a pretty big theme. It sounds like, they want better ideas for facilitating this kind of mentorship, though, that the traditional methods and the traditional ways that they've done it before maybe just aren't working anymore.
Mentorship came up a lot in the study that the foundation did in the women's study that they are working. We haven't gotten the full results yet, but an executive summary was presented at Convening Leaders. It was all about the fact that women do not occupy top spots in leadership in our industry overwhelmingly. And one of the gaps is mentorship. And I thought it was interesting how they made the distinction between mentoring someone and sponsoring someone. So sponsoring somebody is really speaking up for them and advocating for them to other people in the organization, whereas mentoring is more of a, one-on-one kind of relationship. I think sponsoring is really key to bringing people up, especially women, raising them within organizations. I went a little bit off topic there, but it just struck me that mentoring is also part of another study that was released at Convening Leaders.
Oh, I think that is a spot on connection, Michelle. And just thinking about our industry, so many women who are in the events industry, that was another, I think, point that Ken Holsinger made. If you are willing to just take a hard look and see what attendees want compared to what you're offering, that there's just all this opportunity to do things differently. It's kind of like exciting that there's a new way of doing things. And I also want to shout out to Freeman for one of the things that Ken said was that during the pandemic, the industry had been so collaborative, sharing information, and that Freeman was continuing that. I mean, this information to me is so valuable that I could see where a company might consider a lot of it to be, like that they're not going to share it. This is their advantage. I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that this is like such an opportunity for people to see the results of a really large survey of people that are, just aimed exactly at what business event professionals do.
Yeah, and Ken, I think in the session said something about after the results of this, they've created this excellence framework. That's XLNC. It has experience, learning, networking, and commerce are the 4 pillars of it. They're planning to do another survey or another study that sort of builds out that framework, I guess, which also sounds like it will be interesting because it will start with the results from this survey.
So many people pushed back on the finding that celebrity speakers did not incentivize people to come and that they would rather hear from industry experts. And, they asked that again. And not only was that confirmed, it was even a little stronger, that it was less than 1%.
Yeah, last year when they did it was 1%, and Kim this year said it was less than 1%.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got to use your head, because if a celebrity is an expert in your industry, then that's great. But just celebrity alone, just using that as low hanging fruit, if we put a big name, they'll come, is just not a wise investment.
I mean, I think PCMA has had celebrities on, but they were very specific to a cause or something that PCMA wanted to do. Like, Mian Bialik we wanted to do something, have some stuff about mental health and mental wellness. And so that was the reason for having her. And I think there's been other cases like that in the past too.
Yeah, and I think the fact that those were interview formats rather than a celebrity just speaking on stage during a presentation helps with that. But I think part of the trap of hiring a celebrity is they have canned speeches. They're not going to customize their presentation for that audience. They're highly paid just for their presence and their ability to discuss a particular topic. But I think that is definitely a shortfall of having celebrity speakers. They're not able to connect the dots to your audience. I would rather have a best-selling author who's written about something who can then really address how that relates to your particular role in your industry.
Yeah, they've done a lot of research and stuff. Yeah, I agree. Anyway, the moral of the story is take a look at this report. You'll find a lot of good stuff in it.
Well, thank you all for this conversation. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.